You're listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense with your host, Doug Thorpe. Here's Doug.
Well, hello again, everyone. This is Doug Thorpe, and you're listening to another episode of Leadership Powered by Common Sense. Our topic today is human hacking. We hear about hacking a lot of things, hacking the internet and hacking security accounts, cybersecurity, and all that stuff. But we're going to talk about the human side of things from a leadership perspective. My guest is a gentleman who has spoken and written on the topic, and his name is Chris Hadnagy. And Chris, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Nice to be here, Doug.
So how did you get on this idea of human hacking? Where did it all begin, and how'd you get to the conclusion?
So we got to go back over 20 years. My job was ethical hacking on computers. Companies would hire us to basically hack their computers and to tell them how we did it so the bad guys couldn't do it. And I was reading all these books from people like Frank Abagnale. He's the Catch Me If You Can guy. Kevin Mitnick, he went to prison for being a social engineer. Victor Lustig was a famous con man who sold the Brooklyn Bridge and the Eiffel Tower a few times. And I was fascinated by how these people always seemed to be super friendly, super kind, but they got people to do the craziest things on the planet. So I wonder if we can use that in our security practice legally. So I started to do this work for clients. And then I had a CEO changing my whole life. He said to me, okay, Chris, you did it. Now, how do I fix it? And I said, I got no clue. And he said, Chris, if I went to a mechanic and I said, hey, what's that noise? And he said, my brakes. I went, fix it. He said, I don't know how. I'd never use that mechanic again. And I'm like, you're 100% right. I was basically just Wild West, just doing a thing. So I started to read like all these books you see behind me, influence, persuasion, neuroscience, nonverbals, body language. And I started to consume everything I can. And I built a framework for how I felt ethical social engineering can go and how we can understand how con men understand human decision making and then use that against us. And that framework came out in 2009. And then I got a call from a publisher, asked me to write a book on that framework. And my first book came out in 2010. And when this happened, there wasn't even an industry behind this. So this became an industry in security. Jump forward 15 years. And I realized that it's not just good for security, that you can use this every day in leadership, communications, negotiations, and these skills are really transferable across many, many platforms.
That is fascinating. And you mentioned Abagnale. I'm a big fan of the story in the movie. And every time I see one of his videotapes pop up about an interview he might have done, and it's just bizarre to think about some of the really simple and potentially obvious ideas that he leveraged to pull off his cons. And the one takeaway I've got from it is just, for him, it was kind of a really blind confidence about being able to show up. And that's where we got the term con man. They build confidence in the mark, the person they're going after, and then they leverage that to their own devices. So that all sounds dark and suspicious and like you said, often illegal. So how can a leader really turn that around for the good, the greater good of things?
That's a question I get asked a lot because it does sound like you're talking about manipulating people. So the first thing I'll say is understanding how humans make decisions is really part of the process. But the very first part of being a good leader is self-awareness. If you're not self-aware on how you communicate your strengths and your weaknesses, it's going to be almost impossible to use these skills. And a lot of these bad guys, what you see commonly in them is they're very self-aware at their skill set. They're very self-aware how friendly they are and how confident they are. So a leader needs to be very self-aware. I'm going to use myself as a bad example. Back in the day, I'm a very direct, blunt speaker. And I would often find myself saying things like, well, I'm just being honest. I mean, if you can't handle it, that's not my fault. Hearing that now, it's kind of like cringy, like that's not a very good leadership talk. And you just kind of, it gives you the excuse to just say things that you would never say to somebody. Becoming self-aware, realizing that strength I have to be direct can also be a weakness, enabled me to build empathy and a better communication profile in order to communicate my needs, desires, my motivations, my goals with my team or with other people or with potential clients in a way that I could still keep my personality, but I've softened that. And that all came with the first being self-aware.
Well, the idea of self-awareness is very much one of the pivotal elements of this whole concept of emotional intelligence that is so popular to talk about now. And I know from a executive coaching standpoint, we in our coaching circles talk a lot about that. How do you help someone level up their emotional intelligence? Well, it always starts with a willingness to become more self-aware.
Yes.
And I use an old phrase for it, learn how to read the room.
Yeah. And that's a big thing. I mean, we hear a lot about EQ nowadays, right? And everyone's talking about that. But like you said, I think the focus needs to be that first step is not learning how to get other people to do what you want them to do. It's learning how to communicate your motivations and your desires in a way that opens the conversation in a good manner that will allow you to accomplish your goals, right? So where a con man is using all these skills to kind of like force you to accept his motive and to accept his path, we're using those skills to open those doors to a better conversation that will allow us to achieve our goals.
So that triggers a number of thoughts for me, but let's start with the one of, it's often said as a leader, one of the best things you can do is surround yourself with better people, people that are smarter, more capable, better skill sets, etc. And then again, know how to leverage them for the greater good. And again, it's not manipulating or nefarious activity at all. It's just optimization of the situation and the opportunity. So in the idea of opening that dialogue, opening that conversation to get those people to come in, what do you see as some of the challenges that most people bring when they have been promoted up into a leadership role?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I love that what you said, because I think a lot of times we don't get out of our own way, which affects our leadership, right? So we want to be the best, the smartest, the shiniest in the room. But that doesn't match with what you just said, which I agree with, is surrounding yourself with people who are better, smarter than you. All the good leaders I've ever worked with, they had a team that was just excelled at the things that they did. And that leader kind of just stepped back and let them do their thing. It just kind of motivated them, steered them in the right direction, empowered them to make the right decisions, and that team took off. So I would say that the first thing I notice is that if you're the kind of leader that you have to be the shiniest in the room, that's going to hurt you. Yeah, it's nothing wrong. I mean, I have team members now. I have some people on my team, and I created this industry. I helped create the services in this industry, and I got team that could do it way better than me. And that doesn't hurt me at all. It doesn't hurt my ego. It makes me proud, because eventually, if I want to retire, I know who's going to take it over, right? And you got these young guys and gals who can come in and achieve things that I never thought were possible. A good leader will look at that, and that will make them appear and feel better. I feel like a leader should always be looking at your replacement. Can I train my replacement? And that's not the idea of like I'm going to get fired or get replaced in a bad way. I'm going to move up. So who's going to fill that gap when I move up? And I want to train that person below me to kind of take that place.
Not to get too far off on a detour, but listening to what you're saying there, I'm reminded of a situation I had a number of years ago. I had a fairly senior executive at a large global brand I was working with. And as I got to know him and we worked together, he finally opened up one day and he said there's an executive one rung above him that is a real pain in everybody's side. The guy has a reputation of being the famous smartest guy in the room, and he just stifles all discussion and all creativity, because once a topic gets laid out, he just takes over. And he's genuinely, what my person was telling me, this guy is genuinely smart. He just has a gift for this, but it's very off-putting. It's very detrimental to the team effort and the collective they could otherwise have. So we talked about it for a while, and I finally challenged my client. I said, what would happen if you put that on the table, if you had that discussion with this guy? And he said, God, I don't know. He said, probably runs the gamut from career-ending event for me to maybe it'll work. And so we talked about it a little more, and I said, well, what do you really have to lose at this point? Do you really think they're going to allow it to be a career-ending moment for you? And he said, no, I don't think that's going to happen. I said, well, why don't you try it? And he grinned. He said, well, guess what? I've got a 4-hour plane flight on a private jet with this guy tomorrow. He said, I'll see.
Uh-huh.
Well, a week or so later, I got back with him and I said, how'd that go? And he said, you know what? It was amazing. He said, the moment came and I took it and I said to this guy, you do, I hope, understand everybody fancies you as the smartest guy in the room. And the guy said, gosh, I hope that's not really true. And my guy said, well, yes, it is very true. And the guy asked him, he said, well, so, okay, I'm curious. Well, what does that mean? What does that do to things? And that opened the door for the whole discussion. Well, it stifles all other contribution, all other creativity. Nobody wants to talk to trump what you've said.
Hmm.
And he said the guy broke down and started crying.
Wow.
He said, that's the last thing I ever want to do. I love this business. I love this company. I love this industry, and I love all the people. He said, if that's the way I'm coming across, I am horribly sorry because that was never part of the intent. But I tell that story to go back to your original point. It's that awareness. He didn't
Yeah.
have the
He didn't
awareness
have it.
that people were shutting down and turning off just by him opening his mouth. So he began a journey, apparently, as the story goes, of he came back after that trip and started going around to his direct reports and all the other people and apologized and said, if I've ever offended you, I'm sorry. It was never intended to be that way. And created a whole new environment of dialogue and began taking a position of speaking last if there was a meeting.
It's amazing how humble that guy was. And I love that story because a lot of times what we find is that if someone's not self-aware, but they have humility, then when they're made to be self-aware, that's the action that you want. Like that guy probably came back and he became an amazing leader by going back and apologizing to your team is maybe one of the best things you can ever do if you mess up. And how beautiful of a thing that would have built with that relationship between him and his team to realize, oh, this guy wasn't trying to make me feel bad. He wasn't trying to make me feel small. And then to see that change, now that apology is so much more effective. That's a great story. Yeah, that should be one you always tell.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it really was, and it was kind of impactful, and I count that experience as a high watermark for my own coaching practice because at this company I had a chance to deal with quite a number of their leadership team, and the whole point was there was a new chairman that had taken over, and he had been in the seat about a year, and he started this culture change in leadership because he said, our current culture won't support the workforce of the future. So we need to make a culture change. So right away, he was advocating awareness of a need.
Very smart. That's a good to see that times are changing. If you don't change with the times, it's going to be very bad for you and your company.
So as you engage with leaders and are invited to come in and help them understand this sort of human hacking element, where do you usually begin?
So it really starts with kind of analyzing, well, what do they perceive the problem to be, right? The challenges, the problems, whatever that is. I want to hear from them. Like, what is it that they think they're struggling with or the team is struggling with? And then we want to gauge their self-awareness, right? Is because a lot of times the problems that they're seeing could be real, they could be perception, but they may not be seeing that it's starting right here as opposed to somewhere else. They're thinking, well, Doug, he's my problem child because he doesn't do what I say. He's always talking back. He's got all the best ideas, he thinks. And okay, well, now let's analyze your self-awareness and let's see if that's part of the problem. If a leader's not willing to go to that step, that's usually a good indicator that we're going to have a lot of work to do, right? Once we get past that self-awareness, honestly, and I can tell you from my own personal experience and many people I've worked with, that moment is like the light bulb revelation, angels singing from the heavens, all that kind of stuff, because they start to see, whoa, I didn't realize that my communication style could be creating these type of feelings in my team. Right? I use a profiling tool called DISC, and we figure out the style of their communication and how it has strengths and weaknesses. And when they see that, a lot of times it's just mind blowing for them. They're like, whoa, that's a big deal. And now we start to talk about the problems or the challenges they said before. And let's work through this communication profile, and let's look at your team's communication profile, and let's see how they communicate back to you. And now what adjustments can you make in order to kind of step up into that leader role and really get that motivation going there? That's kind of like the path we go. Of course, there's many different steps along the way, but that's really the main path that we take.
I love that approach, and I use it a lot in my own coaching practice as well. And one of many tools I use is the Hogan assessment. And Dr. Hogan, when he was doing his work, he defined the dynamic between our identity, that's the story we tell ourselves about who and what we are, versus our reputation, that's how others perceive us. And obviously the reputation is a culmination of a lot of different moments and events and experiences. And as Brian Tracy famously said, it's how you make them feel. you know, and as a leader, having that awareness to routinely check, is the identity that I think I'm creating for myself, is that consistent with the reputation that is being produced? And if there's a disconnect there, then what am I going to do to fix that and align it better? And maybe it is standing up and apologizing for a behavior that has been detrimental to the greater good of the outfit. I'm similarly in the storytelling vein. I'm reminded I had a guest on my show a couple of years ago who told a story about one of her clients, small enterprise, privately held, but about, 30 or 40 employees. One day, kind of call him the office manager, popped her head in the guy's office and said, "Hey, boss, any chance we could just take a break and go down the street and have a coffee this afternoon? Everything's clicking. We're running good. What do you think about that?" And he goes, "That's a great idea. Let's just call it, we'll shut it down. Let's go." So they go to this little coffee shop and everybody's got their beverage. And this same spokesperson says, "Well, we wanted to invite you here for another reason. We have a list of concerns that we would like to share with you." And this leader, fortunately, had the emotional intelligence and awareness. He said, "Okay, bring it on. What do you have?" And he was genuine. He wasn't defensive. And they started with, "You're a micromanager. You're driving us nuts. We think we can do the work. We get the vision, and we really don't need you hovering over us to get the things done. Let's start there." And he got out a notepad and started scribbling some stuff. And he goes, okay, I got that. I see it. What's next? And there was this long list. Well, they went through it all. And he said to the group, "I genuinely appreciate you guys bringing this to me. I'm going to ask for 48 hours to concentrate on this. Let me get back to you. I know I owe you an answer and a response, and I want to do that." So he true to word, he came back and kind of went down the list, and he said, "I see this. I promise you it won't ever happen again. And you had that thing over there, and here's what I think we can do about that." And he very positively responded to the whole list, and sure enough, it elevated the whole business.
I love that. Similar in my business, we're pretty small. We only have like 16 people here, but I have an open door policy. All my employees know that they can come and they can tell me, "Hey, I really didn't like the way you handled that situation," or "I thought you kind of stepped over the line," or, "Man, that was a little aggressive," or "Why are you not taking care of this situation?" And there'll be no retribution, right? Literally none. Like, I need them to do that. And I said, in the same vein, I want to have that same open door policy with you. Like, if I see something that needs to be changed, I want to be able to come to you and talk to you. And the best part of something like that sounds like this leader was doing the same thing, is that when you have that and then they see the actual change being made, That is so empowering for your people, right? If they can come to you and say, I really don't like, that team meeting. I don't like the way you conducted that or something, this, or this. And then they see that change occur the next time. They're like, oh, he actually took my advice. He listened. And that makes them feel so great that they were able to voice their opinions and affect the change, and you actually valued that opinion. That kind of that's human hacking at a high level, right? Because now you're giving them that reciprocity, that gift of saying, I took your advice, I heard you, and now I changed. And you really can't pay that forward enough.
Right. Well, and that runs right along with a premise that I've got in my book about building trust at work. And it's a book that a partner and I wrote to help leaders understand actual proactive effort that you can do to elevate the level of trust in your workplace. And it's really based on a really simple human dynamic that we observed and we've tried to practice most of our careers. And that is that when you think about how two people build trust with one another, like think about the dating relationship, back in the day when you were in the market and looking for a life partner, you met someone, you agreed on a meeting place, and whether it's a dinner or movie or whatever. But as you're having your discussions, what are you doing? You're fundamentally asking questions. What's your favorite color? What do you like to do? Do you travel much? Where have you been? Tell me about your family, and that same principle, I argue, applies in the workplace. Your employees have questions about what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And the more a leader can openly and honestly field those questions, and big bold letters, you don't always have to say yes, but you need to have a honest and fair answer to the question. The more you can do that, the level of trust with that employee will grow. Or they will self-select. They'll make a choice and say, not enough of these answers align for me personally. I'm going to go somewhere else. And guess what? That's okay.
Yeah.
You need to know that. You need to know that.
Yeah, it's really building that trust in a team is really what can make that team very strong. And even if, like, I love what you said, even if that trust means, hey, this isn't the right place for you. I've had a few employees that, in meeting, talking about some quality control, they just didn't like the job anymore. So I'm like, okay, well, you know what? Then let's have an exit plan. Why don't we do this? Why don't you take a month? I'll keep paying you. You don't have to work anymore. Find another job, right? And if you find one in a week, great. But why don't you take that, right? So that way you can find a job at a place that you want. And they're kind of like shocked, like, what? I'm not getting fired? Like, no, why would I fire you, right? Like you're saying you don't want to be here, so don't be here. It's not bad for your health. It's bad for your mental health. And I don't want you here if you don't want to be here because I love my company, right? So I'm not angry. Let's make it amicable and let's find you a place to go. And I've had employees, ex-employees to this day that we still stay in contact. We're still friends, and they went on to other things. Fine with me, right? Doesn't really matter.
Right.
So I think when you have that empathy and that self-awareness mixed together, then communication can be so much easier, even if it's a difficult conversation.
Well, at the risk of poking at a stereotype, I'm inferring something I want to ask you about, Chris. You described your early days. You were doing some computer system type hacking. So I take that you come from a base of being a technology guy, and
Yep.
stereotypically, technology guys don't have some of the people skills that we might think of that leaders need. So, what do you say? And I will apologize to anybody that might be offended by what I just said, but I know for a fact I've got a whole slate of clients who either identify with that or at least relate to it. But how does someone sort of bust out of that? You mentioned the personality trait, I guess, as a starting point of understanding that identity you bring to the world that may not quite resonate and connect with others. And how do you really start that evolution?
Well, it has to start with a desire to change, right? So that's the very first thing, because if the person doesn't have a desire to change, it's kind of like, think about someone who knows that they need to get in shape, but they just don't do anything about it. You can't force it, Like you could be your best friend to that person. You'd be like, hey man, I really want to see you get healthy. I'm really worried about it. Unless they're motivated, nothing's going to happen. So that person needs to be at least self-aware enough to go, okay, this is causing a problem and I need a change. And I'll tell you, for me, I was teaching a class with a really good friend of mine, and I was teaching it like a drill sergeant. I was just like barking out orders. So after day one, my friend, we're sitting in a restaurant, we're having some dinner, and he says, hey, your information is so good, but I think your style is going to tire you out. Actually, let me back up. He started with something really smart. He said, hey, are you really exhausted after a day of training? I said, yeah, man. I mean, this is day one, and I feel like it's day five. And he's like, do you mind if I give you my opinion of why you might be so exhausted? And I'm like, yeah, sure, man. He's like, your information is so good. You could see people loving it, but your style of delivery is kind of like a drill sergeant. And I think that's what makes you tired. And I started thinking about that, and I'm like, yeah, you're kind of right. He said, now what if instead of having your hands down like this, what if you would have turned them over and invite people to listen to you? It changes your tone. It's kind of like putting a smile on your face. It changes your vocal tone. So he said, tomorrow, I want you to slow down. I want you to smile when you're teaching. And I want you to change your hand gestures. I did that, and the whole effect of the class was completely different. Now, to be honest, that took me probably about a year of practice to make it natural for me. But it was the desire I had to have to really see that change to start it off. So anyone who's listening to this, and it is stereotypical, but I do believe that a lot of us that start off technologically, we're behind a screen so much that we don't really interact with people. And, code will do what I tell it to do if I tell it to do it. So now all of a sudden I'm managing people, and I'm like, well, why can't you just be like my code? Right? Like, I mean, and I don't understand. It doesn't make sense. It's binary, zeros and ones, right? People aren't zeros and ones. They're not binary. So you have to look at them different. And for me, it was a desire to change. And then you start with the self-awareness training, the communication training, and things like that can help you accomplish that goal of that change.
Well, a couple of takeaways from your story there, and I'm sure you appreciate your friend bringing that up, but I love the dynamic that he demonstrated by first basically asking permission to give the feedback. That's kind of a coaching 101 tip that we are given and encouraged to understand when someone may be sitting there talking about an issue or a concern. Instead of just jumping in with a solution, it's important to ask the question, would you like some feedback on that? Would you like another idea? Would you, like some other insight? And, 99% of the time, people will say, well, yeah, sure. But there's something magic in that just simple acknowledgement of coming on board and embracing that idea for the input.
I think the reason that works is because instead of just coming in and giving unsolicited advice to someone, saying like, hey, here's your problem and here's the solution, by asking, I'm now expecting to be told something if I agree, right? So if you say, hey, can I give you some advice on why you might be so tired? And I go, yes, now it's like, okay, I'm waiting to hear. What is your thoughts on that? Now, for the advice giver, here's something I learned from my friend back then. You still have to be kind, right? He can't come and go, you're a jerk when you train, right? And that's why you're so tired. That would have offended me, would have hurt my feelings, right? So that's not good. He was still kind about it. He was like, I think you're so tired because of the energy you're putting into it. The energy is like a drill sergeant, and that energy is just going to tire you out and the class. And I'm like, ooh, you're right. See, and that was a kind way of getting me to realize that I was being really harsh in my training method. So don't think that by asking the question, any leaders listening to this, that gives you the open permission now to kind of just be blunt, right? You still have to use that empathy and that kindness in order to achieve your goal while doing that.
I think that's a great point, and I do think that's true. And I'm going back many years in my career path. I spent some time as a consultant before I got into coaching, and what drove me into coaching was the frequency of the time I would be on a job on some kind of consulting engagement, and I'd be doing my work, doing my thing, and eventually the executive that was the sponsor of the project would give me one of these, wag the finger, come in the door, and close the door behind you. I'd like to talk about something, and it would be usually kind of more of a personal challenge and than anything to do with the work. They would maybe they would be talking about a stakeholder that was giving them trouble, or maybe even an employee that they were struggling with. And fortunately, I'd already seen some of the teaching, and I had already become aware of that. Ask permission to give the feedback. So I would hear the story, and then I would say, would you like some feedback on that? And in those moments, inevitably, they would say, well, that's why I called you in here. Yeah, sure. Tell me, talk to me, talk to me. And then but to your point, that just opened up the door, because in their own way, they were thinking, well, maybe this Doug guy could give me some ideas or help me. He seems like an okay guy to talk to. And, that got me curious about what it meant to be a more of a coach and leadership development person, which turned out to be far more fulfilling than the consulting work I was doing.
I hear you. When you see people make that change, it feels so empowering and reassuring.
Well, and knowing that they're in a position of authority already, so they do have influence over teams of people. You have this strange sense of you might just be making the world a little bit better for somebody.
Yeah.
And that's a good feeling. It's a great thing to have. Well, what else happens, Chris, as let's say into the second year or the second period of development as you work with clients? What then starts to mature and take shape?
So now usually what happens is once you see some of those changes and those shifts, now you have to start discussing difficult conversation. Because it's really easy once you make those changes, it's really easy to be empathetic and nice and use all the right nonverbals and the gestures when things are going great. But when things are going bad, or things are stressful, or you have a problem employee, that's the time when your old personality easily can come out, right? Your old method. So we have to start focusing on, okay, you've made this a habit. You've changed the way you communicate. You've helped motivate, but now you got a problem. You got a problem child, right? So I have a story for this. So I had a guy, he had a client, and he comes to me and he says, man, I got this guy. Let's just call him Joe. And man, when I hired him a couple years ago, he was my best person, motivated, unbelievable. Now I've been emailing saying, hey, why is this report all messed up? Been emailing him like, why are you like not accomplishing this task on time? And I never get a good answer. It's just like, oh, sorry, I'll fix it. I'll go back and do it. And I think I have to let him go. And I said, okay. I said, well, instead of doing that, you can do that. So that's well within your right as the boss. You could say, look, your quality's not here. You're out. I said, or what if you had a meeting with him and you said, Joe, I got a question. When 2 years ago, man, you were amazing at this job, and I saw the passion in you. Lately, I haven't seen that. Is there something going on in your life that's affecting that? And I said, but do it and then shut up. Let him talk. Listen, really listen to what he's saying. Say, because maybe he says, I just don't like it here anymore. This job isn't fulfilling. Well, then you have a clear path. Let's have an exit strategy. Or maybe he says he's having some real life problems. So client, he says, okay, I'm going to try that. So he does that, calls Joe into the office, sits him down, says it just like I said. And Joe just breaks down crying. And he's like, yeah, it's like my wife's divorcing me. I've been having a lot of problems. My kids are mad at me. I just feel like I can't get my head above water. And then I come here and I'm failing at my job. It's just another thing I'm messing up. And this guy is just pouring his heart out. So the boss goes, wow. Like in his head, he's like, I was on the verge of firing this guy. Who knows what he would have done to himself with all those life problems if now I let him go. So instead he says, okay, Joe, I still think you got it in you. So why don't we do this? Why don't we reduce some of your responsibility for a couple months while you work out your life problems? And then we can talk again and see what happens. And he was like, what? You would do that? He's like, yeah. He goes, I value you. I want you here. You're one of my best. So let's do something that we can do. That's a great leader, right? He took the time to reduce some of his responsibility, take away those things that he was messing up because his brain just wasn't working that way anymore. And now Joe, top-notch employee again. He's one of his best. He worked through his life problems, got his head above water, and came right back to the person he was before. So I think helping them on that, like that second tier, like you said, that second year, whatever it is, how to have empathy during difficult times, that can take your leadership now to a whole nother level.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a fabulous story and so important. And I often talk about that with the leaders I work with, that it's a direct example of the application of Maslow's hierarchy of need. You know, when your Joe was having trouble, he was down on that base rung of Maslow's hierarchy. He didn't feel safe. He didn't feel secure. He had a constant question of his own existence, you know, and survival in those moments. But what Maslow's hierarchy tells us, you can't do your big intellectual work until you're way up the rungs there and at the higher level of the scale. And as a leader, the way I apply that principle is when you walk out and the Joes on your team are not doing what you knew they were capable of doing, don't just immediately jump down their throat, but ask the question, what else is going on?
Yeah.
It might have been as simple as they just had a horrible fight with the spouse on the way out the door. Wasn't led to divorce yet, but it was still a very ugly, unsettling moment. So give them the grace and support of, you know, well, okay, well, why don't you take a half day, go get your head back on straight, and let's not keep the pressure of the job going right now. And I've had leaders that have challenged me on that, saying, but you don't understand our environment. We can't afford to do that with people. We've, you know, got too many things going on. And my only response to that is that, well, you're not going to get the product you want.
I asked them, how much more is it going to cost you to replace Joe?
Yeah, yeah.
Like, now you have a new person you have to train. You're not going to get that quality. So isn't it better to give him a couple months to get his legs under himself again instead of just replacing him? That's a huge cost, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And sometimes it is a matter of just a period of time. Now, are you going to have the occasional employee that abuses that privilege, takes advantage of your grace
Sure.
and your generosity? Yes, you do. That will happen. But again, those are ongoing pattern-based
Yes.
discussions that you can talk about.
You know, I have this wonderful employee here. She was my first employee I ever hired. When I hired her, she was a single woman. Through the years, I've seen her get married, have two kids, and every time something changes in her life, we change her job to fit what's going on with her life. So at one time, she was my EA. And then when she had her first child, it was just going to be impossible. Like, there was no way she was going to be able to work and do that. So we gave her a different job that allowed her to work off hours, you know, times when the kid was sleeping or things like that. So she started managing our social media marketing department. And 12 years now we've been together, and I've seen this woman go through so many different roles in my company, but she is literally one of my best employees. Like, I honestly think I can give her any job in the company and she would just do it 100%. And to me, I've had people ask, like, but when you replaced her as your EA, did you just make up a job for her? I'm like, no, I had a need. And I'm like, do you want to try this? And I'll find a new A. And she's like, sure. And we tried it and it worked. Now, if it didn't work, we'd have been like, okay, I don't know if I have another job. So you need to either stay with this one or, you know, or find a different one. But when I had roles that we could move her into, why would I want to lose someone of that caliber? You know, that caliber of employee, just because, well, that's not the job I hired her for. Man, you find someone like that, that kind of loyalty and that kind of intelligence and hard work, man, you better keep that person because that just makes your team all the better. And every employee I have kind of looks to her. She's not really the office manager, but they kind of look to her for like those, you know, office therapy sessions and, you know, close friends talks and things like that. She kind of understands how the whole company runs. Man, you need people like that on your side.
Yeah. You know, it's funny. A lot of that does start with a core work ethic that the person's going to bring, the can-do willingness to try it out, realizing they've got a need, they've got a challenge that they're trying to juggle, and if you're offering something, why not try it? Why not embrace that? And talking about this reminds me of something I told my kids as they were getting ready to get out of school and go into the work world. I told them, I said, you need to figure out how to be a team player, whatever that is. And the example I gave them, if you walk up and the copy machine needs paper in it, learn how to put paper in the copy machine. Be the guy that's going to open the box and put a ream of paper in there. And, some people get so anal about things like that that's somehow beneath them, that they need to go find the EA that knows how to load the paper. Yeah. Well, that's not efficient. And, while you're in your junior rungs of your career, just be the person that's going to help do that for the greater good of the office, And
you know where that starts is with the leader, I find. Right? Like I will have my employees over and I'll cook for them, right? People will be like, well, why do you do that? Like, it's like, because they need to see that. Just because I'm their boss doesn't mean, I'm up here on some throne and they're all down here servant to me, right? No, like we're equals, right? And we go to a conference, and if there's things that need to be cleaned up or trash that needs to be, I'll help do it, right? And that leadership role, they look at that and they go, oh, well, man, if he's doing it, like, I shouldn't just be sitting here taking a break. I should be up there helping, right? And I see that by actually leading by example. I see them. I never have to really tell people what to do. They just could do it.
Right. I agree. Well, Chris, this has been great, and I think we're about up on time for today. Thank you so much for sitting in and sharing all this with us. Tell people the best way to get a hold of you.
There's a couple different ways. One, on LinkedIn, I'm very active on there, so you can hit me up. I usually answer everyone, unless you try to sell me something in the first 5 seconds of saying hello, then I won't. But if that doesn't happen, I'll be more than happy to connect with you there. My website is social-engineer.com. And also in November, we have a conference, the Human Behavior Conference, where we're talking about using influence and merging that with security. So it's humanbehaviorcon.com. So you can reach out to me in any one of those ways.
Great. Well, as always, folks, we're going to have those links in the show notes, so feel free to mash those buttons and reach out to Chris if you are curious and want to be more aware about the possibilities of the work that he's into. But one last time, Chris, thanks so much for all your input here. Good discussion.
Thank you.
And this is also the place in the show, folks, where I like to remind you we do have a video version of this show over on YouTube, channel by the same name, Leadership Powered by Common Sense. Hop over there, check out the archives. You can see the shows that I referred to and many, many more. We're excited to say that we're coming up on show number 400 soon, and we'll be having that later this year. I'm still working on our celebration event and how we're going to honor that milestone, but thanks to everyone who's been a faithful listener and follower, and those who have gone before and been guests and shared their insights. But with that, we're going to sign off, say goodbye, go out there, make it a great day.
You've been listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense, hosted by Doug Thorpe. If you would like to know more about the coaching and advisory services he provides, visit dougthorpe.com.